We will get it edited and sent to y'all. That way y'all will have it for future reference. After this, it'll take us a couple of days because we have to edit it and things like that. So we will get that to y'all whenever we get everything going. So I will turn it over to.
I'm on my lady.
I'll turn this over to Sarah, and she is going to talk to y'all about horses this evening. So Sarah, whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, good evening. My name is Sarah Brode. I'm the county extension agent from Franklin County. I'm technically the ag agent, but really I'm the only agent there. So I kind of do a little bit of everything, including play secretary. So it's kind of a neat job there. So I was tasked tonight to talk about horses. Just a little bit of background about myself. I grew up with horses. My dad was a cutting horse trainer, and I grew up showing cutting horses. And then when I went to college, I did some stock horse to Texas stuff. And I have 2 degrees. I have a bachelor's of science in animal science with a minor in biology, and then a master's of science in ag focusing on equine. And after I got out of college, I worked at some different horse farms. I actually ended up working at an Arabian farm and kind of fell in love with those kind of horses, they're not everybody's cup of tea, but they're mine most days. And so I've gotten really big into doing endurance riding. So I have a few horses. I think currently in my house right now, I think I've got 5. And I've had upwards of 6 or 7 here, which is about all my land can handle and all I want. So we'll kind of look at the outline for tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about land, fencing, housing needs, pasture management, nutritional needs, healthcare costs, acquiring a horse, tack, and dealing with emergencies. As I go, if you have questions, if you want to put them in the chat or raise your hand and turn on your mic and ask the question, that'll be fine. I'll try to stop throughout and make sure that nobody has any questions. And then when we get to the end, we should have some time for questions as well. So the stocking rates for horses. So in Northeast Texas, which is kind of where I'm at, and I think most of you are at, the average is going to be about 1 horse per 3 to 5 acres of managed pasture. So managed pasture means pasture that you've fertilized, that you've done weed control on, that you've taken care of. It's not just I turn my horse out on 3 acres of timberland, which won't support one, by the way. It's just managed pasture. So if you're trying to keep horses on something like you've got kind of a brushy pasture or you've got a lot of wooded areas, you're going to require more acreage to keep a horse on there, and you're probably more than likely going to have to supplement with hay and feed as well. And typically on managed pasture, sometimes we're going to have to supplement part of the year anyway to be able to make that work, depending on how much pasture land you've got. Some questions to ask when you're stocking horses, what kind of horses do I have? Do I have miniature horses, Shetland ponies, or am I trying to feed, 5 draft horses? Because the amount of forage that those animals can take in is significantly different. I can probably have more mini horses on 3 to 5 acres than I can just kind of a quarter horse, a paint, just a standard size horse. But if I've got draft horses, I'm probably going to need a little bit more for them because they will take in more pasture. They're bigger animals. Obviously, they're going to need to eat more to maintain weight. You also need to think about what are you doing with them? Right now I've got some horses out on pasture that aren't ridden a whole lot. And so I don't necessarily need for them to be knee deep in coastal grass, 24/7 for them to maintain weight. And we'll talk a little bit about, feeding them a little bit later on tonight. And then, and also on what am I doing with them? If I'm planning on riding them every day, I may not want them turned out in a 40-acre trap where I have to hunt them down. So that really doesn't have anything to do with stocking rates. That's just kind of an aside note. And are you willing to feed hay or grain? If you're not willing to feed hay and or grain, you're going to have quite a bit of pasture per horse to make sure that they can maintain their body weight. So Just think about that when you are and looking at a pasture and trying to decide how many horses can you put on there, because it's deceptive. You may look out there and go, man, I've got 5 acres of the best coastal grass ever. I bet I can turn 5 of them out there. And it'll work for a little while, but then they're essentially probably going to ruin your pasture. So again, the average is just 1 horse per 3 to 5 acres of managed pasture. And then also be honest with yourself. Do you have managed pasture? Are you fertilizing that pasture? Are you taking care of it? Are you doing the weed control? Those things are expensive. And sometimes we may just have kind of a mediocre pasture and we're just kind of getting by. And again, if you're not doing all the extra stuff with it, you may not be able to put as many horses on it as you would like to. So just kind of think about that as we go. Do you have any questions on stocking rates? It was actually kind of hard to find this information. I can find a whole lot of stuff on cows. So I actually had to call our state specialist, and this was kind of the average that she gave me. If you're in another part and you're not in Northeast Texas, you might talk to your extension agent there and see kind of what y'all.
Sarah, so far we don't have any questions, so you're good.
Okay, good deal. Perfect. All right, so fencing and housing. Fencing is going to be a large expense if you're just if you're just buying a property, or even if you've got a property and you're just getting horses, or thinking about getting horses. Fencing is extremely expensive. Jessica and I were talking today, and the average cost for labor to have somebody fence your property is going to run around $3 to $3.50 a foot to put that fence up. And that doesn't include the cost of materials. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute, about what kind of fencing you might need for horses and how much is it going to cost. Those materials can, yes.
Before you get too far into it, I do have a feed question that just popped up.
Okay.
It said, Katie Smallwood said, I have a question. Do you have to put them 3 to 5 if you feed them, or is that 3 to 5 for if you aren't feeding them feed and hay?
If you're feeding them feed and hay, so say you've got them in the barn at night and you're just putting them out on pasture during the day, you're going to be able to put more horses on that property because you are supplementing them with something else. If you're just going to turn them out and that's, good luck to your horsey, that 3 to 5 acres is kind of the minimum for that. Now, again, as you feed and supplement, you can add more horses. You're going to have to do a little bit more pasture management, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation on doing that. But yes, no, that's a good question, and I should have covered that. So if you're willing, to feed in hay at night or all the time, or you've got them on a rotation, you can definitely put more horses on that number of acres, but you have to be willing to spend the money to feed them. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, just stop me again. So,
okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. So on fencing, I kind of started off, I tried to make myself an outline. How many and what type of horses are you planning on fencing or housing? You're welcome, Katie. If I'm housing 2 or 3 geldings, then, I can probably be a little less hardcore on my fencing. Geldings don't tend to get in a lot of fights. They don't tend to cause a lot of problems. They just kind of want to hang out and live their best life. If you're housing mares or breeding stallions, period, whether they're breeding or not, let's hope they're not at this point. If you're housing breeding horses, mares or stallions, fencing's got to be a little bit more of a priority, especially if you have a stallion. If you just have mares, again, depending on how well they get along, you can kind of, not be quite as intense on your fencing. But if you're trying to fence in stallions, you need to be prepared to do some pretty excessive fencing to be able to keep them where they're supposed to be, to keep them out of trouble, to keep your mares out of trouble, or maybe to keep your neighbor's mares out of trouble. So again, it just kind of depends on what kind of horses are you trying to house, and then again, how many, and how well do they get along? Because I know, like right now, I've got 2 pastures, and sometimes I have to split my geldings and my mares because I have geldings that go crazy trying to act like they're stud horses with my mares and things like that. And then I also have some mares that just flat, they don't get along. So I've got to be willing to kind of have extra pasture, fence that off, and do some different things there. And there's several different options on that. And that kind of plays into, what can you afford? And then how can you make what you can afford as safe as possible? If you look around online, they'll tell you, dear Lord, please don't house your horses in barbed wire fencing. Now, I will tell you, barbed wire is not my first choice. It can cause you problems. You can have horses get into it, cut legs, cut chest. I mean, they can hurt themselves very severely, which as a horse, they try to hurt themselves anyway. But for instance, when I moved to my property, the majority of it's fenced with barbed wire fencing. We have barbed wire around a majority of it, and then we have pipe and cable fencing around the rest of it. I don't think barbed wire is ideal. I don't love it, but I'm here to tell you I couldn't afford to refence it. And so because those pastures are big enough, I don't feel like my horses can get caught in a corner or damaged as a general rule. I'm fine with leaving them in barbed wire because that's what I could afford. The fence was already up. The horses that I have are accustomed to being kept in barbed wire fences. Do I think it's the top-notch best horse fencing ever? No. But again, it was what I could afford. So I try to make that fence as safe as possible. I make sure that those horses can see it. If I bring a new horse, I make sure that I don't turn them out with the others till that horse has had time to kind of know where the fences are. Things like that. I also like to run electric fence to keep horses off of the barbed wire. If I think it's going to be a problem, I'll run some electric fencing to try to keep them away from that fence as much as possible. And if you have horses, horses like to walk down fences. They like to lean over the top barb and eat the grass and cause problems. And so electric fencing can help you with that as well. As far as what's a great horse fence, probably the best horse fence you can get is what they call V-wire. And so if you've ever seen it, it looks like a grid of triangles going across there. And it's great. The horse can't stick a foot in it. They can't, they're not going to be able to run through it. If you put it up tight enough, that fence is going to hold a lot of horse. It's also very expensive. It's going to run you at least $4 a foot. So again, what can you afford? Can you afford that fence? Great, build it. But if you can't, you've got other options. You can use, like I said, I think our fence is 6-strand barbed wire. You could also use smooth wire. Just know that while smooth wire is a little safer than barbed wire, it can still cut your horses if they get tangled up in it. It's a little, again, it runs about the same cost as barbed wire. And Jessica and I talked this morning, and I can't remember, what did you tell me, Jessica, about $80 for a roll of barbed wire?
Yes.
Somewhere? Okay.
The last time I priced barbed wire, which is about 2.5 to 3 months ago, it was $80 a wire, and that was for 2-point barbed wire.
Yeah.
So it's very expensive.
Yeah, thank you. And so, again, but that's probably barbed wire and T-post is probably going to be your cheapest option, and then slick wire and T-post. You can also use, some people will use net wire with barbed wire or electric wire on the top. I don't really like net fencing because net fencing, the netting is big enough. The average fence, Katie, I would say 5 to 6 foot. 5 foot's kind of on the low end. I wouldn't get any lower than 5, and I would say I would prefer my fences to be around 6, just to be on the safe side. If you're building a fence. But again, if you've got a shorter fence, run, a couple strands of hot wire along the top or something like that, add a little bit to it, can help you with that. The next, to me, probably another really good option for fence. Oh, back to net wire. Don't use it if you can help it. They stick feet in it. They'll hang a horseshoe on it. If you've got shod horses, they'll push it down. Net wire is just, it looks like it would be really safe. And as far as one getting hurt on it, they're probably not, but they're gonna, they can get a foot hung and tear down a fence or tear a shoe off or something like that. It's just not a great option typically.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
We have a question. How tall is an average fence for horses?
Like I said, I think I would really prefer a fence to be at least 5 foot. 6 would make me happier. Um, just just to keep one, especially if I've got horses that are jumping horses that tend to kind of want to go over stuff. 6 foot makes me a little happier. But if you've got a short fence, say you've got a 4.5 foot fence put in, you can run some electric wire along the top, or put a top rail or something on there to kind of help keep them contained. So but I would say somewhere between 5 and 6 feet would be kind of an average for horse fencing.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, no problem. So electric wire, I don't necessarily like electric wire. It's cheaper than electric tape or electric cable, but I prefer, if you're going to run an electric fence, spend the money and do the electric cable or the electric tape, probably the widest electric tape you can buy. I saw some 2-inch today that I thought would be tremendous. I mean, you could run 4 strands of that and hold a lot of horse in there. Horses don't like electricity, and they will respect it. It makes a great fence, and that white tape can be seen. They see it. They know it's there. They have very little tendencies to run through it. You do have to do some maintenance with electric fence. You have to keep the weeds off of it. You've got to make sure it's grounded. You've got to pay attention to make sure it's still on. But 9 times out of 10, if you've trained a horse to stay in electric fence, after they've been there a little while, you can turn it off every once in a while if you need to, and they're not going to try it. Now, don't leave it off all the time, because eventually they will get smart to that, or somebody will, they'll give it a shot sometimes. I know we see a lot of board fencing, or even the plastic board fencing. I'm not a big fan of that. Boards for like true wood boards tend to rot. Same thing with wooden posts, and it just gives your horses something to chew on. If they run out of grass and they get bored, they will go chew on your fence. I've got some that they're standing out there in knee-deep grass, and some days they just get bored and go chew on the fence anyway. So I'm not a big fan of wood fencing. Plus, on wood and plastic, if they run through it, they can get hurt pretty severely, because those fences are designed to break. They will break. And when your horse goes through it, they could get a lot of splinters. They could run into nails. Wood fencing is just not really my favorite. So I'm going to kind of leave fencing. That was kind of a broad overview. If you have questions, again, let me know, or catch me later on that if you want to. Housing, it's got similar questions as fencing. How many? What type of horses are you housing? A lot of people are a big fan of, run-in sheds and things like that, and that's great. Just make sure that you have enough room for all the horses you're trying to put in that run-in shed, or let go into the shed. And if possible, if you're running more than probably 2 or 3, have another place for those other horses to go. They're not all going to want to go and behave. I'm sure if you're familiar with horses, or if you're not, they have a pecking order, and there'll be one that runs everybody out and says, I'm king of the shed and you can't have it. Or queen of the shed. It's usually a mare causing issues like that. Not all the time, but a lot of times. And so, and I'll be real honest. I've got some horses in pasture right now that their housing is a tree. I don't have a shed for them to get in. I just kind of let them live out there. It makes me a little nervous when there's hail. I do tend to move them inside of a barn when I have hail, but other than that, I don't get too worried about it. I do have some sheds on the other side, so they're nice to have. It's a good option for horses. A lot of times you'll have them a shed and they'll be standing out there in the rain and the snow anyway. Why? I do not know. And then if you've got housing, how much time do you have to spend cleaning? So I'm talking about run-in sheds, but for instance, if you want to have a barn, you're going to keep your horses stalled part of the time, and that's not bad. Or maybe you want to keep them housed all the time in a barn. You need to know how much time you have to spend cleaning, or are you going to hire somebody? And how much money do you have for bedding? Shavings run, I think at Tractor Supply right now, I'm paying about $4.50 for a bale of shavings. To bed a good size stall, which the smallest you could do would be 10 by 10, and really I prefer a 12 by 12. You're going to need 3 or 4 bags of shavings to bed that stall. And then as you clean it, you're going to have to, of course, replace those. And then periodically, you're going to have to totally strip them out and start over. And so, think about that when you want to keep horses in stalls. Everybody thinks that's, people all their lives, like, oh, I read in a book, they keep them in a barn, keep them in a stall. And it's really, to me, it's not the most ideal situation for a horse. If they've got pasture or runs, they do better than they do in a barn. But you can keep them there. Just know that you're going to have to spend a fair amount of time cleaning stalls. It's great therapy, but can be very time consuming and expensive at times. And then you've also got to take care of all of their water, all of their feed, and cleaning all that mess up. And it gets to be time consuming. And if you keep them in a barn, you can also have horses that will develop stable vices. They'll start to chew wood, or they'll weave, or they'll start to crib. And cribbing is where they hook their front teeth on and they tighten their throat and they suck air. And those things can cause damage to their teeth. It can also cause them to lose weight, to not maintain as well. And just mentally, if you've got a horse doing that, he's not a happy horse. So just think about that if you're planning on keeping a horse in a barn. I didn't spend a lot of time on barns. If you have questions about that, if you want to know a little more about that, just, drop it in the chat or let me know and I can talk a little bit more about that. I kind of went at this more from a pasture aspect than I did keeping one in a barn or a run. So if I need to cover that, just let me know. Let's see, pasture management. All right, how can you get the most out of the pasture that you have? So of course, weed control. Number one, if you have weeds, they're taking nutrients away from your grass. It is important to do weed control, not only for your grass, but also there are some weeds that are toxic to horses. And if your weeds get out of control and your horses can't get to your grass, then they start eating things they shouldn't. Typically, if they have access to good quality grass, with the exception of baby horses who don't always know better, they're not going to eat stuff that's poisonous to them most of the time. But if you let your weed population kind of go out of control, it's doing two things. It's shading out your grass, it's taking nutrients from your grass, and it's providing an opportunity for that horse to pick up something that he doesn't need. And again, as I said earlier, horses they're always looking for some place to get into trouble. So, make sure you're doing the good weed control. Talk to your county agent, ask them, what's recommended. You can use, if you don't have a way to take your horses off of that pasture, there are a couple of products, Grazon, Duracour, that you're able to spray and still have your horses, on that pasture. I probably wouldn't leave them in there while you're spraying. That might cause a ruckus, but, you could put them back out there and they would be able to still have grass. Be sure and fertilize your pasture as much as you can. I understand right now that fertilizer is extremely expensive. My husband was telling me yesterday he wasn't even sure that we were going to be able to afford to fertilize our pasture. And so that's when weed control becomes super important, because I need all the nutrients I can for my grass. But if you can, fertilize your pastures. Now, that being said, watch your horses very carefully after you fertilize a pasture. When that grass is doing so well and has all those nutrients and is super rich, some horses can actually founder or get laminitis from eating super fertilized rich grass. Sometimes if you think that's going to be an issue, you might try, if you've got a way to put them up in a run or a barn or a pen for a little while and just let them have limited access to the grass and let them rebuild up a tolerance for it. I would sure recommend that. The other time when that becomes a problem is when winter grasses come out, those lush, really pretty wild rye, or rye if you've planted it, just the real nice green winter grasses. If you have horses that are not used to being on that lush pasture and you throw them out there, be on the lookout for problems. A lot of horses, if they're not used to it, they will founder or they can colic as well. And that's, those are two very not good things to have happen to your horses. So just be real careful with that. And then also, just for funsies, the sugar content in grass is actually higher at night. So if you have horses that tend to founder or tend to have problems, or you're building them up, try to put them up at night. That way they're not getting so much sugar. Horses are not designed to eat sugar. They're really not designed to eat as lush a pasture as we've got them on. So we do have to kind of watch them and be careful. You'll notice that horses on super lush pasture, sometimes they'll have problems with their feet. Their feet will be a little crumbly. They won't hold shoes as well because they weren't, I mean, when God created horses, he designed them to go across the wild pastures, go, 20 or 30 miles a day and eat junk. I mean, eat just whatever they could find. And so they're just not designed to have that much sugar. So just be careful with that. Rotational grazing. If you've got enough pasture and you can cross fence it or use electric fencing to kind of change the sections, rotational grazing is a great way. And that's for a couple of reasons. The next statement I have is drag your pastures. And those two things are for one of the same reasons. Horses exhibit what's known as eliminative behavior. I always mess that one up. Eliminative behavior, which means a lot of times they have a tendency to find one place they like to go to the bathroom. And where they go to the bathroom, they're not going to eat, which I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to either. And that does help them not get as many parasites. But what will happen is I've got a paddock right now that's that way. You'll have half of it that's like grass up to your knees, or, well, sometimes weeds, but right now it's grass. And then you'll have another half of it that's chewed down to the dirt because those horses don't want to eat where they've gone, where they've defecated or urinated over there. And so what you can do to help eliminate that, again, is the rotational grazing. Force them to eat in a new spot. Also, drag your pastures so that you're dragging out those poop piles, you're spreading them out, you're letting the rain kind of water them into the ground when we have rain. And, that's also going to help you control parasites because you're spreading out those eggs, you're letting them dry out in the sun or the cold, and it'll prevent overgrazing. Again, horses, they will graze down to the dirt and ruin a part of your pasture while the other part looks great, but they're never going to eat it. So it's super important that, again, if you can, rotate your grazing areas. If you can't, be sure and drag your pastures. Dragging your pastures is key. And I'll be the first to tell you, I'm terrible about that. That's why I have a paddock like I've got. It's because I haven't got out there and spread the poop piles. But it's, like I said, it's very, very important. All right. Does anybody have any questions so far? Oh, and also the picture that says, when you eat out because nothing in the house sounds good. Yeah, that's a horse right there. He's looking for trouble. They always want to eat on the other side of the fence. This is another shout out for using electric fencing to prevent something like that. So, all right. Nutritional needs. So I took this handy dandy little chart from a study that was done by some people at Texas A&M, and it's the recommended daily feed intakes for a horse as a percent of their body weight. So if you've got a horse that's a mature horse, not a growing horse, just your average pasture ornament out there, he's not doing anything, he's just hanging out, you don't ride him, you just look at him out there, he's not going to take as much, of course. He'll take about 1.5 to 2% of his body weight in forage, and he'll take 0.5 to 0.5 of his body weight in concentrate. And concentrate just means grain, if you're feeding pellets, whatever you're feeding as a grain supplement to their forage. And so I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. Horses were designed to eat 23 hours a day. And so having grass in them all the time is good. So this forage is what they need. But if they're on grass, if they take in a little bit more forage, it's not going to hurt them. Well, unless they get really obese, and then they might. Like ponies, you got to kind of watch ponies on grass. Of course, late gestation mares are going to take a little bit more than the mature horse. Lactating mares take a whole lot more. They take as much, or they take nearly as much as a horse that's under extremely heavy work, or or a growing horse, because they're feeding another horse. And so I always try to feed my mares, my brood mares, really, really well. I had a professor in college, Dr. Henneke, who developed the body condition scoring system. And he always said he wanted his mares to pack a lunch. He didn't mind if they were a little bit fat going into foaling, because then when that colt started sucking them down, it had something, they had somewhere to go. They had a little extra to take care of them. So feed your lactating mares really well. And I firmly believe in feeding just my mares that are bred extremely well. just to kind of help them have a little extra when it comes to foaling time. And then, of course, working horses, it's going to depend on what kind of work are they doing. Are you riding them around the house, 3 days a week at a walk, just checking stuff out? Or are you, are they going to the racetrack tomorrow to go try to win the Kentucky Derby? They're going to have different feed needs, and it shows you on there, kind of the range on that as to what they need. And then, of course, growing horses take a lot. Weanlings don't take quite as much as yearlings, but yearlings take a lot because they're really, really putting on mass and growth at that time. So just be careful. Make sure that when you're feeding horses, forage is important. Sometimes people get hung up on, oh, he needs more grain, he needs more grain, he needs more grain. And really, the forage part of their diet is probably more important than even the concentrate. If you feel like they need more, then in their forage, you can supplement that with alfalfa, or you can soak beet pulp and give them a little bit of extra in the forage department, and you'll be surprised at how well they do on that versus upping the grain. When we feed horses a lot of concentrate, we have a tendency to upset their stomachs sometimes. They're not really designed, again, they're not designed to eat really rich feed. So just be careful with that. Like I said earlier, horses are designed to eat 23 hours a day. Humans have forced them into a mealtime feeding situation. So it becomes important, if you're going to mealtime feed, you need to be consistent. You need to try to feed those horses roughly around the same time every day. Because if you don't, I'll back up a little bit. Horses don't have a gallbladder. So the only time they produce bile is when that stomach is getting ready to digest feed. It knows it's feeding time. So its stomach says, it's time. And so it starts to create bile. If they don't have feed to kind of go in with that bile, then it can help create ulcers and create problems. And along those same lines, horses are not designed to digest a large quantity of fat. They can really, the most, and this is the absolute most they can adjust to digest, is going to be around 10%. And really 6 to 7% is pushing it. So when you're buying a feed, and I recommend a pelleted feed, but any of them, look at that fat content. More fat is not always a good thing. Fat can then, if you feed too much and it doesn't get digested in the stomach, it travels through to the hindgut. It gums up the microbes that help digest their forage, and it can really start to cause your horses some issues. So just be careful with that. And also know that on protein, horses can only digest up to 16% protein. And I don't usually feed 16% protein to anything except for maybe bred mares or lactating mares or growing young horses. 16% is a lot of protein, and they can get pretty hot on that. So just some things there. Again, feeding quality roughage is the key to a happy horse. If you've got to keep them in a barn, do your utmost best to keep hay in front of them. It will prevent stable vices. It'll help prevent ulcers and other gut issues, because a horse that's hungry is an unhappy horse, and it, just like us, stress causes us to have ulcers. It's the same thing with horses, and stress to them is not having something to eat, because again, they were designed to eat 23 hours a day. So I do try, if I've got to stall a horse, I bite the bullet, I pay extra money, and I keep good quality hay in front of them all the time. They should always have access to hay. So, and then on feeding, people want to talk about, well, how much do I feed? Well, start with recommendation on the back of the bag. It'll tell you, how many pounds a day your working horse needs, or how many pounds a day your whatever needs. So start there, but then also look at your horse. And on the body condition score, it runs a range of 1 to 9, and 1 is basically dead. It's a walking skeleton. I mean, there is no fat on that horse anywhere to be found. 5 is about average. Most horses in work are going to be about a 4, which means that I can see a few ribs, but they still have plenty of fat cover over there. They're not just sticking out. 5 means that I pretty much, if I want to see a rib, I can kind of see it, but I probably need to put my hand on it. And then when you get up to 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, you have to mash to find some fat. And it gets a little harder as the number goes up. And 9 to me is the fattest Shetland pony you've ever seen. Yes.
Sorry, got a question. No, I just saw it.
Sure.
She said, we have a lot of pine on our land. Would pine needles be harmful?
You know, it probably wouldn't be good for them to consume a lot of pine needles, but typically if they've got something else to eat, most horses are not going to mess with pine needles. Now, if you put them in a lot and that's all they've got and you're not feeding them, which I don't think anybody here would do that, then yes, they're going to eat them. And yeah, they probably would cause them some problems. To my knowledge, they're not toxic to horses, but I don't know that they would digest real well. So, I mean.
Okay, thank you. But thank you for that. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. That works for me. So a 9 again is the fattest Shetland pony you've ever seen, and I'm sure all of you have seen that pony that is like waddling across there, and you think, dear Lord, what is that? It looks like almost like a beach ball. That's a 9, and there's more to that than this, but just that's kind of a basic working knowledge. You'd like your horses to be between a 4 and a 5. If you've got a horse that's really working hard, a 4 is pretty good. They don't need to be carrying a lot of extra weight while they're trying to work for you. So feed your horses to their body condition scores, where I was going with that. If you've got a super fat horse, well, don't go out there, get the bag and says, well, I need to feed him 2 pounds a day, so I'm going to feed him 2 pounds a day or 3 pounds a day or whatever. Go, holy moly, that sucker's fat. Maybe I could cut him back, and feed him less until I get him where I want him to be. Right now, since my horses are on good pasture, I've got some mares that they're in good enough body condition that I feed them once a day, a half of and I know I should weigh it, but anyway, do as I say, not as I do. But anyway, I feed a half a plastic feed scoop once a day just so I can see them and make sure that nobody's cut a leg off. They don't really need any grain because they're in good condition on the pasture that I've got. I've got a brood mare though that I'm feeding, I feed her twice a day, the top limit for her, and make sure that, she's taken care of, because she's got a colt on her, so it just depends. And in the wintertime, I'm going to feed more feed. I'll feed twice a day in the wintertime, and I'll add some to it to kind of up that body condition score. If you've got a super, super skinny horse out there, maybe you need to up his feed him a little different feed, feed him more often. If you could feed a horse 3 or 4 times a day, it's really better for them. A lot of people don't have that option, and so twice a day is fine. Just, feed to their body condition score, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The package on the label on the feed is a guide, but you need to feed to your body, to the body condition score of your horse. And if you're feeding very, very skinny horses, you're going to have to be kind of careful with that because they're not used to having it, and you've got to kind of up them slowly. That's the other thing with horses, real quick, and then we'll move on to a different topic, is that horses don't like sudden changes. So again, feeding around the same time each day, feeding the same feed. I've known people that they told me, well, I was feeding Safe Choice, but I ran out and they didn't have any, so I just got this Do More, blah, 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 and I fed it to them. Well, when they're horse colics, I can tell you why. They don't do change very well, and that means, if they're used to getting a half a scoop, don't go out there and one day go, you look a little skinny, let me give you 2 scoops today. You've got to up them slowly, or they can get pretty sick. Horses, like I said, they're just looking for a place to kill themselves any way they can most days, especially if they're good ones. Healthcare. So, you can end up putting a fair amount of money into healthcare in horses, and this is just preventative care. This is not even emergency care or problems. This is things like vaccinations. The minimum vaccinations you want to give a horse is going to be the VWT with a West Nile and a rabies shot. Those are all, VWT and West Nile are all transmitted by mosquitoes and biting flies and things like that. And so those are important, and they're important vaccinations because you don't know when you're going to get a mosquito that's bit something else that flew over here and now is going to bite and feed on your horse and transfer, those diseases to them. And West Nile and I think all of that's VWT is Venezuelan, Eastern, and Western encephalitis, and then a tetanus shot. And so with the VWT and the West Nile, or the VEW and the West Nile, that's a neurologic disease. It can cause your horses a lot of problems, and they may or may not come back from that. So at the minimum, they need to have those vaccinations. Tetanus is super important because, just like tetanus is important for us, they're out there in that environment, they could cut themselves, get some kind of, get that tetanus in there, and then you've got a problem. Rabies is important, especially if you've got pasture horses. Rabies might not be as important if you've got horses in a barn that are never going out, they never see the outside world. But horses in a pasture, you never know when a baby's going to get curious, or a silly old gelding's going to get curious and stomp up to a skunk and get bit, or by a raccoon. Horses are curious and they go jack with stuff. If you've got them, they'll do that. And if you don't have them, but you get them, you'll learn this. They mess with anything, especially young horses. And so rabies is important if you've got horses on pasture. The next two is a strangles vaccination and or rhino flu. Strangles, it's kind of, it's a bad disease. It gets into horses' lymph nodes. It causes them to bulge and have issues. They'll have a lot of drainage. They'll abscess. It's gross. But most horses live through strangles. And strangles is a lot like, to me, I compare it to us taking the flu shot. I don't know how you feel about the flu shot, but I feel like the flu shot's about 80% effective, and it depends on what strain I've got. It's the same thing with strangles. It's about 80% effective, and it's going to depend on what strain of strangles you have. There are some ranches that have actually, they culture the strangles that's on their place, and they get a vaccine built specifically for the strain that has infected their barn or their area, because that's, it stays in the ground. And if you take horses anywhere where there's been strangles, if they haven't had it, and they're going to get it, chances are. And when you're dealing with strangles, talk to a vet before you start trying to treat it, because sometimes when we start trying to treat strangles, instead of just letting it bust out, we can actually cause it to do what they call bastardize, and then it goes internally and can kill your horse much faster. So just be careful with that one. But again, that vaccine is not one I give, but it's an option if you're worried about it. The rhino flu shot, that's kind of for equine influenza and the rhinomyces virus. That's important if you're going places where there's a lot of horses. Any of my horses that I haul to endurance rides, or I take to shows, or I travel with, I go ahead and give them a rhino flu shot. It kind of just helps. It just helps them not get sick. Again, rhino flu probably not going to kill them, but you can keep your horse a little more comfortable if they've been vaccinated against it, and you can keep being able to go, to your show season and stuff like that. Rhino flu is also important if you've got pregnant mares. They're going to need that shot at 5, 7, and 9 months of pregnancy to help prevent abortion. Rhino causes abortion, so that's important to have that vaccine in bred mares. And so, but those are kind of the main vaccines. There'll be, there could be some others out there, but those are the main ones that we look at. And those shots are going to run you. I think the other day I did what I never do. I went to the vet and I bought a shot, and I think I paid about $60 for a VWT and a West Nile. So it can be very pricey. I recommend, I usually go online to one of the vet sites and I order my vaccines that way and have them shipped. It gets a little cheaper that way. So I do my own vaccinations. Some people really like to use vaccinations as a chance to get to know their veterinarian. And that's important, knowing, having a vet that you like and that will work with you and has seen your horses before you have an emergency. So, if you're willing, you can go there, and just know that it's going to cost you a little bit more for them to do the vaccines than if you're doing them yourself. Nothing wrong, in my opinion, either way you go. It's just what you're comfortable with and what you want to do. Farrier, are you going to go barefoot, or do you think your horse needs shoes? I generally say in our part of the world we have so much sand. I don't shoe anything unless I have a major problem. Um, and I have a friend that's a barefoot farrier that probably, if I took the time, she could probably fix them without shoes. But she's not here. So sometimes if I've got a real problem, I'll shoe a horse. The last time I had a horse shod on just the fronts, I paid $95 for a set. A barefoot trim is going to cost you, oh, we'll just average it about 45. Some will go a little lower, some will be a little higher. Finding a good farrier is hard. And don't be afraid to kind of shop around. If you don't like what your farrier is doing with your horses and you don't think it's good for them, I mean, just politely tell them, hey, I want to try somebody else. I want to see what else we can do. Don't be afraid, but also know that finding a good farrier that's willing to come and willing to be on time is sometimes a challenge. And a lot of the good ones are really booked. So be prepared to do a little hunting. Don't just think I'm going to call them and get my horses trimmed tomorrow, because chances are, if they're very good, you're not. Have your horses ready. Make sure that, anytime, whether the vet's coming, the dentist is coming, the farrier's coming, have your horses caught and ready for those people. I used to trim horses for people, and nothing would aggravate me more when I got there and they didn't have horses caught, they weren't ready. And I wasted, 30 or 45 minutes waiting on them to catch horses and get ready for me. So and I guarantee you other farriers and veterinarians and dentists feel the same way. Dental care. There is actually a lot of good, just straight up equine dentists out there. You can always use your vet. Some vets are more willing to do it than others. Some are better than others. Right now, I actually use a mobile equine dentist, and she comes out about once a year to my place. It runs me for my horses that she's done before. I think I paid $70 a head to have them floated. And then I think originally, they were $80 a head. And if you have more than 3, she doesn't charge you as much per horse. She's local around this area. And so, but you can always find a good horse dentist that'll kind of work with you. They spend a little more time. They have a little more time sometimes than your vet. And that's what they do all day. So they have the tools to do it, and they kind of like doing that. So, but again, a vet can do it. Vet care, like I said earlier, have a vet that you like and will work with you, and make sure they're a horse vet. Some vets are horse vets and some vets are not. And the ones that are not, sometimes they'll try really hard for you, but they don't quite have that knowledge to do you quite the job you need, particularly if you've got something really wrong. I use a vet out of Kilgore named Dr. Thoney. I love him. I think he's the best equine vet in the area, but there are some others around this area. So shop around, find one that you like, and find one that you can afford. Some of them are cheaper than others. Just be careful with that, but get to know them, and that way they can help you when you have problems. All right. Do you have any questions? I know I'm going kind of fast, but I have no idea what my time frame is. So
No, you don't have any questions so far.
Okay, good deal.
Good.
All right, so we're getting close to the end here anyway. So acquiring a horse and or tack. I don't know how many of you are experienced horse people or looking to get into the horse business, or you're inexperienced, but my number one rule of thumb, I tell everybody, if you don't really know horses, take somebody with you that knows horses. Same thing with tack. If you're going to go buy a tack, take somebody that knows your horse and knows what they're looking at. You'll spend a lot less money if you'll take someone who knows what they're doing with you to help you get started. Instead of just going out there thinking you know what you're doing, do what you're going to do, and then, oh my gosh, you've got something you can't use and you can't get rid of. Horse traders and tack traders, they'll see you coming sometimes. Avoid taking advice from your horse. Don't just go out there and go, oh, this is my heart horse, I love him, he's great, when the person is telling you that he's 3-legged lame and he's never going to get better, or he's crazy, and you just think you can fix him. Chances are you can't. Don't take advice from your heart. Take advice from your head and your experienced horse person. Pretty is pretty does. There's a lot of horses out there that are gorgeous that are worthless. Kind of like sometimes not always, but pretty people or pretty dogs or pretty anything. A lot of times it may be pretty, but it's not functional. So try to make sure there's nothing wrong to go looking for a pretty horse. Get one. I recommend, you can feed a pretty one as easy as you can feed an ugly one. But I can also feed a good horse for the same money I can feed a bad horse. So get pretty and functional. Um, and sometimes and to me, functionality is more important. I can't ride just a pretty head. I need him to be functional all the way around. And that means conformationally correct, but also functional for what I want to do. If I want to go home and work cattle, I probably don't need to go buy me a thoroughbred racehorse off the track. It might work out. There's some that do, but you're going to have to work a little harder to get there. By that same token, I'm not going to go buy a Western pleasure horse to try to run barrels on. In my lifetime, I've only seen one horse that could actually do Western pleasure and barrels and be equally as good at both. So they're out there, but just generally look at what you want to do and make sure you get something functional. If you go to look at a horse and it's saddled when you get there or it's sweaty when you get there, go home. Don't even bother. I don't, when I go to look at a horse, a lot of times I don't even want them caught when I'm going to look at them because I want to watch that person catch them. I want to see how those horses get caught. I want to see how they stand when they're saddled. And I want to know how they ride after they've just been saddled. I don't want something that's been worked to death when I go to look at it. I just go home. So cheap usually equals trash. You can find some good cheap horses out there, but you've got to be willing to shop and not buy the first one that comes down the road, especially when it comes to kids' horses or horses for novice people. Cheap usually equals trash. I would say 9 times out of 10. Jessica, I don't know if y'all got something to add to that, but that's usually cheap horses I really watch. There's a reason they're cheap. So be careful. Like I said, I'm not saying you can't do it. I've got a horse that's a 100-mile endurance horse that I paid $800 for. But I also knew the person I was buying him from, and he was a rescue, and I was an experienced rider and willing to risk $800. If I'm looking for something for my kid or a novice rider, $800 is not going to be my budget. So just know that. And this may make some people mad, but avoid, or at least really study it before you go, avoid kill pens, Mustangs, free horses, and rescues. Horses, a majority of the time, they're in a kill pen for a reason. They didn't get there because they were wonderful citizens and they were great horses. Now, I'm not going to say that that's always the case. I know that there are exceptions to every rule. But a lot of times, if they're standing in a sale barn or a kill pen, there's a reason why they weren't sold, private treaty. So watch out for those. Mustangs kind of take an experienced person. The older they are, the harder they are to deal with. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go buy one from the Mustang Makeover that somebody's done a really good job on. Those horses are probably fine. But as a general rule, just going to the BLM and adopting one, that may be more than you want. And they've got a whole lot of stipulations on fencing and housing for them as well. So you need to make sure you have the appropriate equipment for them. Free horses. I will tell you, the last free riding horse I got her home and she promptly ran me over like a freight train. And so that was probably the last free horse I took. I took a free weanling, but again, it was from somebody that I knew and I knew the situation. But beware of free horses. Again, there's a reason they're free. Either they're hard keepers, the people can't afford to feed them, and you may not be able to either, or they've got a problem somewhere. Just be careful. Rescues. Rescues are kind of the same way. A lot of times to me, horses end up in rescues because they weren't very good citizens to begin with. Somebody didn't feed them, and then somebody felt sorry for them, and they took them, and they're not good. Again, not going to say you can't get some good horses out of rescues, but be careful. The other thing with rescues is a lot of them have a no sale clause, and so then you're stuck with that horse. And I don't know about you, but I don't like being stuck with anything I pay money for. If I pay money for it, it needs to be mine so that it can go away if I don't like it. So, emergencies. My dad always said good horses were born trying to kill themselves. He said a bad horse, you could keep them in a junkyard and they never do anything to themselves. He said a good horse, you can keep them in a padded stall and they'll find some way to break a leg. Very true. So, be sure you have a vet that does emergency calls. If you don't have a horse trailer, make sure you have a vet that does emergency farm calls. And there are not many of those in this part of the world. Like I said, my favorite horse vet does not do farm calls. So if I wanted my horse to go to him, I have to take that horse. So I kind of have to know about that. Do they take emergency calls? Have some basics on hand and talk to your vet. Again, if you're a new horse person, I'm not advocating go out and buy you a bottle of Banamine and try to figure out how to use it. Talk to your vet. Some of those things have to go IV, but there are other options. This morning I had my filly that I have on my mare actually tried to colic, and I was the only one home to help, to have any help with her. So I tried to give it to her IV. I couldn't because she wouldn't hold still. I did get it in her, but I couldn't keep it in her. And so I gave it to her orally. Know that you've got some choices, but keep some stuff, talk to your vet and ask him, what can you give me that I can keep on hand? Banamine also comes in a paste, which if you don't know what Banamine is, it's like horsey Tylenol kind of anti-inflammatory kind of thing. Bute the same way. Keep some needles and syringes of various in asunder sizes. For horses, I usually I like a 20 to an 18 gauge needle and I'll have some that are inch long and some that are inch and a half. It just depends on what I'm doing. You might want a twitch. Probably not a chain twitch, but I've got what they call a humane twitch that just kind of looks like a nutcracker that a horse's nose fits in, sort of. And, kind of help hold one still if you need to doctor one. Have some bandage material. Gauze, brown gauze, Telfa pads, vet wrap. Any of those kinds of things are helpful to have. And then, of course, have some peroxide, alcohol, wound spray, whatever kind of wound spray you want. There's a million of them out there. I like Vetericyn when I can get it. I've also got some other stuff that I use. Just kind of have some basic stuff around that you can doctor your horse. And then know what you can handle and what you can't, and how much you're willing and able to spend on that particular animal. Me personally, I can give an IV shot. I can rebandage a leg. I used to be able to tube one for a colic. I mean, I can do a lot of my own vet stuff. But there's some things that I know that nope, I don't want to try to stitch that up. I need to take it to the vet. Or it's colicking really bad and I can't fix that. It's got to go to the vet. And then I also know going in how much I have in my budget and how much I'm able to spend on that horse. At my place, different horses have different values. I'm willing to spend more on a horse that I have a whole lot in, or that I've had for years and years and years. I might spend a little more on that animal. I might do a little more vet care for that horse. And know when it's time to say goodbye. And sometimes that's hard. And I won't talk a whole lot on that, but be kind to your animals. All right. Now, do you still think you want a horse? If you have horses, I always tell people I wish I wasn't addicted to horses. I have a love-hate relationship with them. I love them a lot, but there are days when I wish I'd never gotten involved with them. But I can't seem to kick the habit, so here I am. Does anybody have any questions? Jessica, do you have anything to add? I know you're a horse person too, so.
No, I think you've done a fantastic job.
Thanks. It was kind of a down and quick overview. I mean, there's a whole lot to it. And if anybody has questions, I'd be, Jessica can send y'all my email or my cell phone number. I'm willing to talk to anybody. I don't mind. Just holler at me if you need me.
Anybody have any questions for Sarah? Any at all?
Well, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, Sarah. I want to thank you for being honest and upfront and straightforward. I feel for the people that go out and do things with different animals and decide they can do it, and all they're doing is hurting the animals. So I appreciate your talk and what you've said a whole lot.
Sure. Well, you're welcome. I try to be pretty honest. I mean, I think that people need to know what they're getting into, whether it's with horses or cattle or dogs or anything. I mean, they need to know kind of what's going on and how much work it's going to take. And they, like I said, I love them, but they're crazy.
And that's why I signed up for these classes, is to hear from people like you.
Sure. Well, glad I could help. And like I said, if anybody needs anything, I'm always available.
Katie just made a comment. She said, "Yes, thank you. Food for thought before we decide to get any."
Yeah,
So,
it's definitely something you want to ruminate on a while.
So awesome. Well, if anybody has any questions, if one pops up and you're trying to figure out, and you get a thought while the other presentation is going, then just put it in the chat and and Sarah will be on and I'll be on. So either I'll answer it for Sarah or I'll send it to Sarah and we'll get it answered for y'all.
Yep.
So
I'm gonna step out for just a minute, but I'll be back before the end of the presentation.
okay. Thank you, Sarah.
You bet. Thank y'all.
So our next speaker is going to be Casey Davis. She is the agent in Camp County, and her and Sarah both are. Sarah is my horse person, and I call Casey my chicken lady. And Sarah, that just got done speaking, is also my chicken lady. So this is going to be a very informative and entertaining talk that Casey is going to talk about backyard chickens. She will get her presentation up and going here shortly. Casey, whenever you're ready.
I'm back. I'm here. Let me okay, do I hit the share content? Is that right? Yeah, share screen. There we go.
Yep.
Share this one. But we need to put it in presentation. Okay.
All right, take it away when you're ready.
Give subtitles a try. Okay, go away. I don't know what subtitles are. Okay, go away. All right, guys. So y'all can see my screen. You can see my lovely chicken with the bow tie on.
With the epic bow tie, yes, we can.
Okay, and then y'all can hear me good.
And and just letting you know, the subtitles is typing what you're saying.
Oh, let's turn that off. We don't need that. How did I do that? Subtitles. More settings. Off. Oh gosh, y'all. Why is there not a button that says, off?
Just try hitting the whatever, just the titles again. Sometimes that'll turn it off.
Well, it just says subtitle settings. Let me end it and start over. End slideshow. Okay, there we go. Leave that. Let's try again. Okay.
Yeah, you're good to go now.
Okay, cool. All right, guys. So as Miss Jessica said, I'm Casey Davis. I'm the Ag Natural Resources 4-H Jack of all trades agent in Camp County. This pictured is Betty White, also known as Betty RuPaul White, the rooster. So we'll tell you a little bit more about her towards the end. Him towards the end. Okay, so I'm excited to give this presentation tonight. I haven't done a presentation in a really long time. And I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, being that Jack of all trades agent, things happen. So anyways, this is what we're going to cover tonight. Really just the basics. So we're going to talk about what you need to get started, what you want to get started, health, and then hatching eggs. And then same thing, what you need, what you want. Okay, so I know there's a lot of text in this. The big thing I wanted to take from this page was over here so I can see. All right, the big thing I wanted to take from this is how important water is. So an egg is 65% water. Just like any other livestock, you know, they should have access to clean, fresh water, free choice all the time. Chickens are omnivores. Not a lot of people realize that. A rooster is in fact not needed for hens to lay eggs. Very simple concept. Again, not a lot of people realize that either. One nest box is appropriate for 4 to 5 hens. We're going to cover that a little bit more in depth. Egg laying starts between 18 to 24 weeks, depending on breed. And then chickens are most productive under age 3. So the average life expectancy of a pet chicken or a backyard chicken is 10 to 12 years, but they're going to be the most productive and give that, you know, estimated or typical number of eggs between, you know, once they start laying to when they turn 3. So then I wanted to cover the terminology. So a pullet, I'm a cow person, so a pullet is like a heifer, a young female. A hen is like a cow, a mature female. You have a cockerel that's a young male. A rooster is a mature male, so it's like a bull. Whenever you're buying chicks, typically they're going to be considered straight run, which is not sexed. It could be pullets or cockerels, or they could be pullets, which of course is just your young females. And then of course, when a hen goes broody, which we'll cover a little bit later, I think I've got a couple comments on that, is when your hen begins to sit on a clutch of eggs in order to incubate and hatch them. So during that time, she's not going to be laying any more eggs. She's going to be sitting. Okay, so what do you want? And this is, there's a lot of personal preference here. There are a lot of common breeds. There are going to be a lot of breeds that you see that are easy to purchase. You know, you find them in the feed stores or local farm supply stores. And then, of course, it's going to be based on, do you want laying hens or meat birds? Do you want dark brown egg layers? Do you want blue egg layers? Do you want every color egg layer? Do you want a high number of eggs? Do you want dual purpose? Are you going to have free range chickens or have them be in confinement? So the different breeds do well or excel in different scenarios. So I'm going to make sure y'all get a copy of this handout if you want it. It's a handy little extension fact sheet. I'm going to cover just a couple of the excuse me, I'm going to cover just a few of the breeds it discusses. Sorry, I had to get me a drink of water there. Okay, so again, like I said, a lot of this is personal preference, but we're assuming here that we're wanting egg layers. And so again, there are several more breeds in that fact sheet. These are just a few of them, a few of the more common ones. And then of the breeds, like the Orpington and the Wyandottes, you have lavender Orpingtons, English Orpingtons, buff Orpingtons, Wyandottes. You have Wyandottes, silver lace, blue lace. So you have all different colors within that breed. And that's colors of their feathers, not their eggs. So these are all high production egg layers. And I know that even Plymouth Rocks are known to produce more eggs than Orpington. So that high is you know, an estimate. I think probably 250 to 300 is what they consider high. Then it talks about, you know, aggressiveness, broodiness, what kind of space they need. So for the Wyandottes, they require larger or a higher need for space. So that would probably mean they do better free range, whereas these other three here might do better in confinement or in a coop of some kind. Then it talks about climate, and then of course egg color, which is important to some folks, less important to others. Depends on, you know, what your production, what your operation is and what you're going for. Are you going to sell colored eggs for eating? Are you going to sell eggs, fertilized eggs for producing chicks? You know, it all depends. So, and all of these are brown egg layers except for the Sussex lay white eggs. So again, just wanted to cover a couple more. Your Americanas are blue egg layers. You've got your Australorps, Brahmas that lay brown eggs, and Konas that lay white eggs. So again, if you think about it, this is really like an EPD for chicken breeds. You know, it's got lots of information on here. And with that said, there are several resources with this kind of information. This might be pretty small on your screen, but this is another one from a hatchery that I thought was pretty interesting. Like I said, it gives you basically the same information, but in a different format. So we've got your gold-laced Wyandotte. It talks about their origin, their dual-purpose breed, what kind of eggs they lay, how they lay above average, or I'm sorry, they can produce above average for meat production as well. So that's what would make them essentially a dual purpose. Talks about cold and heat tolerance, talks about foraging, talks about their maturity. So you can see towards the middle there, the Rhode Island Red matures a little bit faster at 19 weeks. Then it talks about their personality. So, you know, that's important if you're going to have children or a small flock, if you want birds that are going to be your friends, if you want birds that are going to hop up on you and you're going to sit out in the coop and have your coffee and enjoy, you know, then that personality and docility is going to be important to look at. Then, of course, the size. If that's important to you, if you want smaller birds, you might want to get a Bantam breed. If size doesn't matter to you, or if you want a larger breed, then you might want to pick a larger one. Okay, again, this one looks probably looks really small on your screen. Just another way to look at the same information. Won't spend much time on it. Okay, lastly, even another way, this is actually, well, it didn't hyperlink, excuse me, didn't make a hyperlink there, but that long website down at the bottom there is really just Tractor Supply. If you go to Tractor Supply or type in Tractor Supply and egg species or egg breeds, it will pull up this interactive chart where you can select by temperament, you can select by what they do, egg layers, game birds, or meat birds. So it's, like I said, it's interactive and there are pictures with it. You know, and it gives, again, that same little detail. And then, of course, this is a place where you can shop. So if they have it in stock or something they can, you know, a breed they can ship, then you can go ahead and order from there. And with that, I should say, you know, Extension doesn't endorse any certain brand names, businesses, stores. It's just a handy link or a handy resource that I wanted y'all to know was out there. Again, so this is on meat birds, I think, or some of these are meat birds, but you can select by temperament, and you can even choose to select if they are flighty. You know, maybe if you have some other purpose for raising birds, then you would want flighty birds. But anyways, a couple more I've got from Purina Mills. This is by egg color. So, you know, if you're wanting blue eggs, green eggs, chocolate, dark brown eggs, or white eggs, you know, then you can choose your eggs or choose your chickens by that. Another picture here, which I thought was really cool, it lists them out again, just same information, but in a different format. And what's interesting to me is it considers Barnvelders, Copper Morans, and Wellsummers all to lay brown eggs, dark brown eggs, whereas that previous chart there, it divides them up. So I'm assuming this probably is listing the chocolate Moran up here for that darker chocolate color. So it's interesting. Like I said, there's a lot of information out there. You know, it's always important to do your fact checking, check your resources, make sure they're trusted. Of course, the feed companies, sure, they're trying to sell feed, but there's a lot of research that goes into that. So I would trust their information. I'd be more careful about your Pinterest, your blogs, your social media posts. Of course, I found this on social media and I like it. So that's just my push there to always check your resources. All right, so getting started. Once you figure out what you want, then we go to what you need. Some of this is pretty basic. I've already covered water. Always fresh water, always free choice. You know, you don't like to drink hot, dirty water. They don't either. Water is one of the most important things, if not the most important. Of course, they're gonna need feed. You know, your younger birds are going to need chick starter and grower, and then once they hit about 18 weeks, you can switch over to a layer feed or game bird feed or whatever you're raising for. Scratch grains, not always necessary. It's good to have something out there for them to peck at, something to keep them busy, something to get a little extra source of nutrients. Oyster shell, that is only going to be necessary if they are having issues with soft shelled eggs. So a lot of people will say that you need to have that out free choice all the time anyways, just as a supplement that's available. I personally haven't had to have any out because my chickens are still relatively young. They are laying, but they're young, and I feed them back their egg shells. So feeding back eggshells is another way to make sure you've got strong shells for your eggs. All right, of course, bedding, heat, and a brooder. So if you're bringing home young chicks, you're gonna want to have some bedding for them, a heat lamp, or a brooder. You don't necessarily have to have a heat lamp. There's a lot of concern about fire safety around your heat lamps. And just my little plug here, I've known a couple people who lost their lives because they were trying to heat up a calf with a heat lamp on their front porch and it burned their house down. I've been pretty lucky. My heat lamps have been pretty safe, but I'm so careful. I don't rely on the little clip that the heat lamp has because it's a piece of junk and it will break. So I'm very careful. I triple tie it on, make sure it's not going to fall. I don't have anything else surrounding it that could fall on it. So if you're going to use a heat lamp, be cautious. There's lots of different brooders out there. You can buy things on Amazon, Etsy, just about anywhere these days. So just make sure, what you're buying, read the directions, make sure you're using it as directed. So there's lots of kits out there. Just a couple pictures. I've got two, or that top one there is from, I think, Tractor Supply. That bottom one, I think, was Amazon, maybe, I'm not sure. No, it was mypetchicken.com. So you can buy the whole package ready to go. That bottom one even has the fencing, if you will, to make a little brooder for them. I'm a relatively new chicken owner. I've had chickens for about a year now. Thanks to Sarah Brode. We've kind of partnered in a little business together on this. I didn't go and buy the whole thing. I tried to use what I have. I've got a old cattle syrup tub that I use as my brooder and a feed trough that I use as my brooder. So I've tried to cut costs where I can, but some things you definitely need, like the feeders and waterers. You really need a kind like that is for chicks. And then of course, making sure you have a good heat source. So let's see. Okay. All right. So moving on, you want to make sure and have secure fencing once they're old enough to be turned out. You want to make sure that they have protection from the elements and pest control. Now, pests can be anywhere from predator. Really, I should have put pest and predator control, but I was referring to predators as well as pests, bugs, insects, things like that. So primarily, I just wanted to discuss fencing and protection. Like I said, there's a couple different options, and these are just a few pictures I pulled. One of the Facebook groups I'm in, and then that one at the top there is Omelet Brand. Like I said, any brand, any type, DIY, home constructed, or if you pay for it, they're all good. But the big point I wanted to make from these pictures is you can see the flat fencing around the bottom there. It kind of sticks out and goes across the grass. And I know a lot of people prefer that or use that for like that bottom picture, that animated picture. If you have a dog, coyote, other wild dog, fox, something like that likes to dig, that will deter them from digging. But it is also very well known for preventing snakes. A snake is not going to want to crawl across that wire. Now, they'll crawl across that plastic top, anything else, but if you're having issues, that's an option. So protection from the elements, again, you want to give them some cover, a place where they can roost. That spool right there, I found that on one of my Facebook groups I'm in, which I thought was really cool because they've got protection from the elements in the center there. I think there's even a heat source at the top because this is considered a brooder for young chicks. So they get some outside time, and then they have time inside under the heat when it cools off, and they are 100% protected. They're not on the ground. So I really liked that DIY option. Okay, just another picture here of some hardware cloth, like I said, laid out around the bottoms of the fence. This might seem a little bit excessive. I would say, if you're not having issues, or if your coop is in your backyard and you've got an external fence, this may not be something that's necessary. But, if your coop is in an open field like mine, if you have stray dogs, animals, or a lot of wildlife come around, then this may be something you want to consider. Or if you're having a snake problem, this is something you probably want to consider. Another option is to bury the fence. So don't lay it out like this, but the upright portion of the coop here, bury it a few inches down into the ground. That's something else that will help animals from digging in. You could also, have a solid base, either wood or say tin, maybe the bottom couple of feet, that would help protect that area as well from digging. So I just threw this picture in. Honestly, 1 to 1.5 inch poultry wire is probably fine. But again, if you're having a lot of issues, or you anticipate having a lot of issues with predators getting in, then you might want to go to a smaller hole like a hardware cloth, or even use that hardware cloth along the bottom. And I didn't specify earlier like Sarah did, but if anybody has questions, Jessica, if you'll let me know in the chat, or we can talk about questions at the end, either way.
So far, you're doing great. No,
Okay.
no questions.
Good deal. Okay, so again, more on getting started. So we have a roost, a nest box, and sanitation. So of course, the roost, chickens like to perch, they like to sit up high. That's another way they can protect themselves from predators while sleeping.
Casey, we got a question just
Okay.
popped up. It said, I'm sorry, Michelle said, do you cover that hardware cloth spread out around the bottom or leave it exposed?
This one here, I would say leave it exposed. If we're talking about to deter snakes. Because again, the snakes won't like how that feels on their belly, so they're not going to slither across it. So for snake control or prevention, do not cover it, leave it exposed. If we're talking about using that for like dogs, coyotes, anything that's going to dig, then yeah, I would say if you want to cover it, I think that would be fine, because it's going to serve the same purpose as if we left it standing upright and just buried it into the ground that way. So if that doesn't make sense, let me know.
Perfect. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so talked about the roost. Nest box, you can see several pictures there. Any kind of nest box is fine. You can go out and spend upwards of $60, $70, $100 on a fancy nest box. They're probably going to still lay beside it, as you can see in that picture that I took this morning of some of my birds. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It can be DIY, like that 5-gallon bucket on the bottom, and just put the little lip on it. Or it can just be a shallow area of dirt, because you can see there in that little wooden nest box I have in that kind of top middle picture, they scraped out all the nice bedding, laid an egg there, and then laid an egg beside it. So they're also communal layers, so they're going to all like to lay in the same spot, whether you have a bunch of boxes or not. Lastly, well, not lastly, but last on this page, sanitation. We all know that's important. It's especially important if they're confined. Good sanitation, keeping the coop clean is a good way to keep your birds healthy. That picture at the top with the roost and the tarp under it, again, that was another one I pulled from the Backyard Chickens Facebook group. I thought that was really handy. It's a good way to keep the coop clean. And if you're harvesting your litter to put in your garden or anything like that, it's an easy way to harvest it. So I thought that was really cool. I wish I could figure something out like that for my coop, but my coop's just not built that way. Okay, lastly, on the getting started, what you need, I have brain games. That might sound like a funny term, but really it's anything that will defeat boredom and prevent cannibalism. Is it necessary? Maybe not. If your chickens are free range, it's probably definitely not necessary, because there are going to be enough bugs and plants and all kinds of things for your free range birds to keep them busy. If they are confined, though, you might want to think about something to keep them busy. Again, putting out scratch grains, that'll keep them busy for a little while. Putting out or, throwing out your overripe produce, your food scraps, things like that. Those are all good options as well. So you don't have to go out and buy a chicken toy. You don't have to go out and buy that whole package in that top picture there from Amazon. I know when I bought my first 6 chickens, I'm now up to an unidentified number. But when I bought my first chickens, I wanted to go out and get that, and I didn't. I bought like a cat toy that just had like a little bell and ball in it. It was similar to the one in the bottom picture, but they were terrified of it. Never played with it. That ball in the bottom picture there, I took that picture today, and those little young birds, they aren't terrified of it, and I know they play with it a little bit because it gets moved around in their coop area. So I don't know, like I said, probably not necessary, but might not be a bad idea. I've got I've got about 10 young birds in one corner of the coop, and they're fenced off, just so they get a little older, get more acclimated to being outside, and then I'm going to turn them out with the rest of the coop. And so I have that little ball in there, which you could also fill with produce, lettuce, berries, anything like that, and they'll roll it around and peck it to get out. So might be an option for you, but like I said, depends on your operation. And also I realize, I've entitled put all of this under the getting started, but again, it all depends on your operation, your budget, with what you need right away versus what you can add along the way as you go, or what you find out that you should have had to begin with. So it just, like I said, it all depends, which is kind of our famous line in extension, that it all depends. And it really does. So specific questions, y'all feel free to ask me later, send me an email later, and we can talk about your plan, your coop, your operation. Okay. I wanted to put this in here. It's kind of timely. It's pretty important. Bird flu pops up every year. Like I said, it's kind of seasonal. I don't know that I would consider it a bad year this year, or maybe it's just because now that I have birds, I'm paying more attention to it. But I think it's been a little bit worse this year than in years past. We're seeing more restrictions on different states about traveling with birds and bringing birds in and out of different states. So I feel like I'm right in saying it's a little worse this year, but I'm sure not near as bad as it could be, and it's probably been worse in the past. So according to Texas Animal Health Commission, the bird flu that we're concerned with this year, H5N1, which is just the strain specifics about the flu. We have, I actually thought there were 2 reported cases in Texas, but when I went to the Texas Animal Health Commission website today, it only listed this one. So maybe I'd misheard a couple months ago when I first thought that. So first case in Texas was April 2nd. It was a commercial pheasant flock, but they were all in confinement, and it was in Erath County. And those birds are all in quarantine. So what can you do to protect your flock? It's all about limitation. So you want to limit the wild birds that come in and interact with your flock. If that's picking up excess food, not leaving it out, not letting your birds free range, that's a big one. That's personally what I'm doing right now, is I'm not letting my birds free range. I love my wild birds, my little cardinals and bluebirds and all that, but I've got an investment in my chickens, and so I've got to do what I can to protect them. So you want to limit, like I said, you want to limit the wild bird interaction. And a lot of that you can't necessarily avoid. Your migratory birds are migrating back. They flew south for the winter. Well, we're south. So they're flying back. And there's, like I said, a lot of that you can't avoid, but there are things you can do to help. Let's see here. Oh, farm visits. So, letting people on your farm to come buy chickens, or going to visit other farms. If you're buying chickens from them, it might be best to meet at a neutral site, or at least provide some shoe coverings or not go into the coop when you go visit. Same thing with your vehicle. Just make sure, because disease can travel if you drive across poultry litter or things like that. Disease can spread in many different ways. Early detection is key. It's not always a death sentence, but it does move pretty fast. So any sick or dead birds that you see, even your wild birds, especially your wild birds, if they're around or nearby your flock, or if you've got waterfowl in a pond or lake or anything like that nearby, you want to report it immediately. Don't touch it. Don't pick it up. Call your Texas Parks and Wildlife Department biologist and get their advice. And it would always be good to make sure they know that you also have poultry. So back to my operation, my birds are outside, they're secured in a fence, and I've got a net covering, which that's really just to prevent them from flying out. There are small birds that do fit through the little holes that occasionally get in there. So, I mean, there's some inherent risk that I'm not going to be able to avoid. But I would, and like Sarah and I were actually talking about this, I would rather my birds be happy than to stick them in my barn, which is solid wood, no windows, no light other than artificial light. So, if you want to take it to that extreme, I mean, I probably would, let's say if there were reports of birds in my county or surrounding counties with the bird flu, but at this point, I don't think it's a real concern. Now, if you're in a different state, if you're in a different part of Texas, talk to your county agent, talk to your Texas Animal Health Commission representative, your local, oh my gosh, what's he called, guys? Your local health official person, and see, what their recommendations are.
Texas Animal Health Commission.
Yeah, that guy. There's like he's a specialist, or I don't know. There's a word for it. Anyways. Okay, so moving on to health, we're going to talk a little bit about digestive health and reproductive health. And I could spend a whole 2-3 more hours on each of these subjects. So I hope I'm just kind of covering the bases here. And if you have more questions, we can go into more detail, or I can give you the resources and you can read up on it yourself. So what is digestion? The breaking down of feed into simple substances or nutrients that can be absorbed by the body. So proper nutrition is feeding the right nutrients and the right amount of nutrients. Of course, we know due to different sizes, different types of digestive systems, then all animals utilize nutrients differently. The main thing I want to cover with health issues are crop issues. So again, I'm a cattle person. If you're familiar with hardware disease, that's where a foreign object, usually metal, settles in the reticulum of cattle and can cause different issues. So the crop kind of serves the same purpose. I mean, scientifically, that would not be the right answer, but basically serves the same purpose, or can serve the same purpose, I should say. So the crop is where it's the enlarged part of the esophagus. The walls of the crop are thin, but it's attached to the skin and the clavicle by loose connective tissue. So the main function of the crop is to store feed while it's waiting to be further digested. But that's also where foreign objects and things that they try to eat or peck at and swallow can fall. So under normal circumstances, the crop will usually empty in about 2 to 4 hours, but crop impaction occurs when the stored material cannot be further digested, propelled forward. So it normally develops when a group of fibers that they are typically eating, normal food fibers, get tangled together and become a mass that's too large to pass. Again, other times it can be where they've swallowed something they shouldn't have. Obviously, this is more common in free-range birds. I try not to let mine free range too often because I have tiny little pea gravel and, well, it's not pea gravel, but it's very small gravel in my driveway. And so I just know that one of them will peck at that and eat too much of it, and it'll settle in her crop. So anyways.
Hey, Casey.
Yes, ma'am.
That's also where you have to be careful when you're feeding scraps to your chickens, because sometimes you
yes.
can actually, you can give them things that they can't digest.
Right. Yes. Also true. So birds that have crop impaction, they will have a reduced appetite. You might see weight loss and overall depression. You want to, again, detect it early. You know, sometimes just seeing that their crop is distended can be your sign. Otherwise, if in a couple hours, they should look better. Sometimes you can gently massage the crop, and that will kind of help break up the contents and help it be further digested. Other times, it's going to require more. Oh, goodness. Oh, there we go. Other times, it's going to require a visit to the vet. So that's what this picture is. I took that from Chicken EDU or an extension resource. Hopefully it doesn't ever get to that point, but you know, that's not something you want to try to do on your own. It's not quite like sticking a blow-up trail car into a rumen of a cow. But yeah, it's not real common, but it can happen. All right, so I think that's all I wanted to cover on digestive health. We're moving on to reproductive health. This is kind of a crude slide, I know, but an egg is simply a chicken, period. So, and that's all to say that you guys remember that a rooster is not required to lay eggs. Now, if you want fertilized eggs and if you want to hatch live chicks, then of course you do need a rooster. Okay, so reproductive health. We're looking at the reproductive tract here, and I'm just going to go over it carefully, or just very briefly. We're not going to go into too much detail. But, you know, we start at the ovary here on the left. The ovary is a cluster of various sizes of follicles. Now, the follicle is the sac that contains the yolk. So very simply to me, that makes sense. We've got the yolk here. It's got to travel through the oviduct. All the while, at each different point, the infundibulum, magnum, isthmus, and then into the uterus, it obtains different things. It acquires the albumin, the shell membranes, and then the shell, and then moves on to the vagina where it's ready to be released. So it takes about 10 days for a yolk to grow from a very small size to the normal size you find in eggs. And again, that function of the oviduct there is to produce the albumin, the white part around the egg yolk, the shell membranes, and the shell itself. All right, so the infundibulum area is where the egg would be fertilized if sperm is present. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to cover. Oh, no, I wanted to also note this. So a lot of folks may not realize as well that, you know, a chicken only has one hole, that cloaca there. So up from the top, you know, that's where the egg's coming from and it was released. And then if you notice on the bottom there is her large intestine. So they truly are butt nuggets. You know, they have one hole. That's why sometimes there might be some poop on the egg. Not anything to be concerned about unless it's true, like really excessive. But again, just some simple facts that you probably already know, but in my short time of owning chickens, I've learned there are quite a few people who don't know these small details. Okay, so reproductive health, again, covered just kind of what reproductively it looks like, and now we're just going to cover a couple of issues. We've got egg abnormalities and then egg binding. So here I've just got some interesting pictures of some different issues. There are so many issues that can happen. Some of those being shellless eggs. So just the yolk and basically looking like a water balloon kind of thing. Yolk mottling, double yolked eggs, which is fairly common. Yolkless eggs, an egg within an egg, blood spots, meat spots, abnormal textures or abnormal shapes. So I've got most all of those pictured there. And why do you need to know this? Other than it being interesting or cool or weird, if that's your thing, A lot of these abnormalities can mean a disease presence or a dietary imbalance or otherwise some other issue going on with your chicken. Okay. Or sometimes they can just be random chance occurrence or just because your chicken is really young or really old. Just a little fact about double yolked eggs, because I know that's the one I've seen before. And even if you just eat eggs, you know, that's sometimes a double yolk egg will still make it through if you're eating eggs or store-bought eggs, I mean. So a double yolk egg can be related to the hen's age or genetic factors. Sometimes some young hens can release 2 yolks from the ovary in a quick succession and be kind of lumped together into 1 egg. Typically, they're going to be larger eggs. I know I've seen those before. You know, in the set of 12 or a dozen eggs, you have one that looks larger. But double yolked eggs are typically not viable. You do not want to incubate or try to hatch out a double yolked egg. There's really not enough room in there for 2 eggs to develop or for 2 chicks to develop fully and hatch out successfully. Not saying it can't happen. I'm in, like I said, quite a few groups on Facebook about hatching eggs and chicken education, and I saw one on there that hatched out just recently, and both of the chicks were doing fine. I wouldn't recommend it, but like Sarah said, you know, you can't say never. Okay, on to health. So egg binding, that is essentially dystocia. So if you think about it, difficult birth, difficult passing of the egg. It's also called being egg bound, egg retention, or an obstructing cloaca. This occurs when a hen is straining for more than a few hours to produce an egg. So this can be caused by many things. Again, she's having this problem because of something previous. You know, the egg bound itself isn't always just the issue. It could be that she's got a poor quality or imbalanced diet, which could mean she has a nutrient deficiency or toxicity. You know, she's lacking or has an excess of something in her diet. It could be that she's a young hen and she's started production a little prematurely. Could be that she's an older hen. It could be that she's had some trauma or she's a little bit overweight. Could also be, you know, again, another feed issue, mycotoxins in the feed, getting a bad bag of feed. So some signs or symptoms, they might be trying to frequent the nest box without producing an egg. They could be having some straining their abdomen, which was in that previous picture. That kind of looked like what she was doing. Persistent tail wagging, abdominal distension, could be having trouble breathing. And then we could notice some cyanosis, which is when their comb changes color. It could change to kind of a bright crimson red and then into a purple or blue color. They could also go lame, meaning not be able to walk or fall over or present some kind of temporary paralysis. Okay, so I took a screenshot of some recommendations for treatment, and I got this from, oh goodness, I need to be careful with that. I got this from poultrydvm.com. So trusted resource, came straight from a veterinarian. Some of the options we can do if we detect it early. So again, with most all diseases or issues, early detection is key. Otherwise, it could be fatal. And then once you remove the egg or get the egg out, we want to do an overall evaluation of the hen, because like I said, it's not that she's just egg bound and that's the problem. It's that there was a problem that has led to the issue of being egg bound. So again, we want to look her over, give her an overall health examination afterwards, just to make sure it's not going to happen again. Okay, and some of those therapies, as they call it, you can put the hen in a warm bath for 5 to 10 minutes. That should help her to relax and help relax her cloaca and abdomen. You can massage, that says message, but massage her abdomen. I'm not sure about this one. You could provide some KY jelly to the area that might help it pass. That's really only going to be if it's right there at the edge of her vagina, though. You know, if the problem is further up in the tract, then that's not going to help. Otherwise, just removing the hen from the flock and keeping her comfortable. And then if worse comes to worse, we might have to call the vet and do some kind of surgery. And when it comes to that, again, it all depends on your operation. Depends on how many birds you have. I know, like my cousin who's just getting started with it, all of her chickens are her pets. And if something's wrong with one of them, she's ready to take it to the vet and make sure it's going to live. Cost is less of an issue. For somebody like Sarah and I, who have a lot more birds, I'm probably going to cry when I lose my first bird because I haven't lost any yet. But when you lose one and you have a whole lot more, it's not to say we care any less. It's not to say that our flock isn't as healthy or it's not as important, because we want our flock healthy. It's our livelihood. But, going to the vet may not necessarily be an option for someone who has a lot more birds. Of course, making sure it doesn't happen to the rest of my birds is definitely important. So, we'll still examine, check over that animal, make sure it's not a health or nutrient issue or any other issue that could happen with the rest of our birds. So again, all about perspective, your flock. Sarah, did you have something to add to that? No, maybe not. Okay, lastly, wanted to cover a few others in health, talking about vaccinations. You don't hear a lot about folks vaccinating their chickens. It's more of a case-by-case basis. If something's in your area, you have a specific concern. So for the small, from the Merck Veterinary Manual, they say for the small flock owner, vaccination is generally necessary only if the birds have had disease problems in the past, or they may possibly be exposed to other birds, like if you go to poultry shows, if you show fancy birds, or if you do meat or bird swaps, wild bird access, if you have wild birds accessing on your property, in your coop, or if new birds are introduced to the flock. So if you meet the criteria for any of that, like I said, case by case basis, let's talk about your operation and talk about if any vaccinations are important or important to think about. Birds should not be vaccinated for a disease that is not present in their local area. Of course, that makes sense. It will only introduce new organisms into the flock. And then, of course, you don't want to vaccinate a sick animal because their immune system is compromised and they may not withstand the stress. 2 diseases that are worth mentioning: Newcastle disease may be recommended based on your geographic area, and then Merrick's disease. That's one I've heard about regularly, but when I hear about it, it's that day-old chicks have been vaccinated. So most of your chicks that you're going to buy from feed stores, farm stores, cooperatives, or you're going to buy direct from those commercial hatcheries, those are going to be Merrick's disease vaccinated as day-old chicks, because it mostly affects young chickens. Okay, lastly, in the other section, PT testing. So PT testing is Pullorum typhoid program, which requires all domestic poultry, chicken, guineas, pheasants, quail, peafowl, and turkey that are offered for sale, trade, or used to produce offspring for sale or trade must be tested for Pullorum and typhoid and be found free of infection. If you're a horse person, I kind of consider that similar to Coggins tested. Like I said, not the exact same, but in my head, I like to relate things. So this PT testing, this comes from Texas Animal Health Commission and the Texas A&M Veterinary Medical Diagnostic Lab. So with this, Sarah and I have been talking a lot about this. Like I said, we've got a little business together and we're considering getting our flock tested. And to me, I don't think it's necessarily an issue of making sure they're PT free, but when I see chickens, poultry for sale, trade, out and about, in stores or whatever, I do notice if that farm says it's PT tested and Merrick's vaccinated. And to me, that just tells me that they've done their due diligence. They're a reputable breeder. They're on top of things and they understand the health and importance and everything that goes into raising their birds. So for me, it's something that, I think we are definitely going to look into it, but for me, it's something that I'd want to do for that reason, so that it shows I'm a reputable breeder. Like I said, I don't know how common those diseases are. I want to say they're not common, or it's something that's been eradicated, and that's why we want to keep it eradicated. Don't quote me on that, like I said, but that's what it makes me think of. And so, yeah, it's legally, if you're selling any kind of birds, they should be PT tested, come from a PT tested flock. Otherwise, you need to be offering them up for discussion, I guess you could say. A lot of sales go on social media, on Facebook. So just be careful, just be careful of what you buy and what you sell. And if you want any more information, again, there's that link there, tvmdl.tamu.edu, and then poultry flock information. I just Googled PT testing Texas, and it pulled this right up. Okay, the last section I think I had was about hatching eggs. And again, I did a little bit of what you need versus what you want. So what you need for hatching eggs, obviously, you need a healthy rooster or fertilized eggs. So the way you get fertilized eggs is by having a healthy rooster and hens that are in production. Then you either need a broody hen or an incubator. For us, and again, this is something Sarah and I were talking about the other day. She doesn't really like to let hens go broody, and it makes sense, especially if you have a large flock and you don't really have a space to confine her off. Then it's hard to, when she gets up to go get a drink or eat, and another hen jumps on that clutch, then you don't know if she's gotten back on there, or she might move over to the next clutch, and then those might not be truly fertilized or ready to be incubated, and so it becomes more confusing and more of an issue when you have a large flock. But if you do have a way to separate them, or if you have breeds that tend to be a lot more broody, like silkies. Silkies are known to be one of the best broody hens. Then you might let them sit on a clutch of eggs. So otherwise, if you don't need that, if you're going to use an incubator, we really recommend the Hovabator 1588. We extension agents do a lot of hatching in the classroom, and this particular incubator is pretty easy to work, easy to read. It's got that open top so kids can look down in it and watch the eggs as they're hatching. The price really varies. Like every website I have gone on, because I'm in need of a new one. Every website I've gone on, the prices ranged from like $100 to $200. So it's pretty crazy. I need to do a little more research and find the best website out there. Okay, in addition to that, you're going to need an egg turner, because while they're in the incubator, they are going to turn. If you're letting a hen sit on them, she's going to turn them herself. She's going to stand up and do a little dance, move her little feet around, and that's going to turn the eggs in the same way. Again, if you're using an incubator, you're going to want a thermometer and hygrometer, which is, of course, to test the temperature and to test the humidity. The Hovabator has that built in. Some people go to the extremes and put an additional thermometer and hygrometer in there just to make sure their machine's working properly. It's not a bad idea if you're hatching out a lot of eggs. It might be something you want to invest in. Of course, an egg candler or flashlight or your phone light is going to be handy, because you want to candle those eggs. You want to candle them about, and I don't remember exactly, but day 10 or 12, 14 maybe, you want to candle them, remove the ones that aren't viable, and then few days before hatch day, you might want to candle them again. And then I have back to the beginning. So what we started off talking about was what you need once you get started with chicks or chickens. And of course, that's a brooder, a feed, feed, waterers, safe area, fencing, etc. All of that. So it really does come full circle. Okay, so hatching eggs, what do you want? So again, I have back to the beginning on there, because that goes back to, well, what do you want to raise, or what are you trying to sell? Are you just trying to sell colorful eggs for eating? Are you trying to sell fertilized eggs, specific breeds, what have you? So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about egg color, because it's genetics and I love genetics. I think it's really cool. So I've got several pictures here that pretty much all say the same thing, but they might say it in a little bit different way. So it might help you understand it a little bit differently. So Easter eggers are considered a breed, but they are really a crossbred animal. So you get an Easter egger which is that top line there, you get an Easter egger from a blue egg layer like an Americana and a tan egg layer like an Orpington or Barred Rock. And then, so they produce a chick that will lay Easter egger colored eggs. And that would be considered an F1 because that's a first generation cross. Then if you take a blue egg layer and a dark brown layer, such as Copper Moran, you will get a chick that will lay olive eggs or be considered an olive egger. And of course, again, that's the first cross, so it's considered an F1. And then, so then this goes into a little bit more detail into a further cross. If you do what is considered a back cross in genetics, so you take that first generation olive egger that you've created and cross it back on one of its parent type chickens. So if you cross it back with a dark brown layer, then what you're going to produce is a chick or a chicken that is going to produce olive eggs, but be considered an F2. So they're going to be even a little bit darker. So if you think about it, again, I'm a cattle person, so I think about this color genetics. That makes sense to me. You know, you cross it back on a darker color, then you're going to get an even darker olive egg. Likewise, if you do that and cross it back to its blue parent, or not its parent, but a blue egg like its parent, then you're going to get what is called a dull spearmint color. And it would also be known as an F2 because that's a second generation cross. If you're into Punnett squares and being really geeky like I am, again, this is another way to look at it. So we've got an Easter egger, a green egg layer across the top here, which is heterozygous, and a brown egg layer on the side here, which is homozygous. Then you do a simple Punnett square, and you'll know that of that offspring, 50% of them should be chickens that will eventually lay green eggs, and 50% will be chickens that will eventually lay brown eggs. All right, and same thing. Okay, so if you do second generation cross with two Easter eggers, so you've got two heterozygous, then you're going to get an even wider variety. So you're going to get second generation Easter eggers. 50% will be green egg layers, 25% blue egg layers, and 25% brown egg layers. All right, and then I think this is my last slide again. Says the exact same thing we already talked about. Looks a little different. It's a little bit larger, so if you needed to see it a little better. Your blue and tan cross is going to produce an Easter egger. Your blue and dark brown is going to produce your olive egger. And then if you do either of those back crosses with the dark brown, you're going to get an even darker olive egger. And then if you cross it with blue, you're going to get that dull spearmint, which is a little bit brighter green, if you ask me. I believe that's all I have. Lastly, I just want to say, you know, chickens are not pets, but also that's me and my pet chicken, Betty White. You know, they are domesticated animals, but just remember, they're omnivores. They are scavengers. They're flock animals. They're not dogs. You know, they're not typically our pets, and it's pretty dang hard to house train a chicken. I did not try, but I tried to learn a little bit about it and decided that was not an option. They stink their poop stinks way too much for me to even consider them being in the house. So, but you know, sometimes things happen, which is what happened here. We tried to hatch out a clutch of lavender Orpingtons. We had a bad hatch. We're pretty sure my humidity was up way too high. So only one of them ended up surviving. And then, you know, I became best friends with a chicken who turned out to be a rooster. So that's all I have for you guys. If you have any questions, let me know. We can cover some now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see all the things in the Teams meeting here. Okay.
Thank you, Casey. That was awesome.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't, you know, too detailed. Once I got started doing a little research and putting together my presentation, then I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. But again, I know I'm an animal science nerd and not everybody else is. So.
Does anybody have any questions for Casey? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can type it in the chat box, one of the two.
I have a question on the chickens.
Sure.
When you have little baby chickens, should you keep your space somewhat smaller so they feel comfortable, or does the space size not matter?
I've heard both, and I've had that question asked to me. So they're going to stay together. They're flock animals, you know, they're communal. They like to be close to each other. So even if you have a large space, they're still going to huddle up together in one corner. But if you keep them really confined in a small area, sometimes they won't grow as fast or as large as they should be for that age range. And I've heard that because when I bought some chickens from a lady, she said, you know, I've had these pullets in a really confined area. So once you turn them out into your coop, they're probably going to grow real fast because they've been turned out into a big area. So I mean, I don't think you know, you don't want to keep, you know, 5 pullets in a storage container for very long, but you know, you don't want to turn them out in the wide open either. So you just, I think making sure they're protected, and then, you know, they have space to walk around and move around, but no, I don't think it needs to be a huge area. I know that didn't, like, it's not a specific answer, but I hope that helps.
Right, but you want to keep your hens away from your pullets for a while?
Oh, okay, yeah, so introducing, I didn't talk about that. Introducing young birds into your flock. I can't remember the exact number of weeks of age, but you want to make sure they're fully feathered out. And then, you know, if you've turned birds out a lot in the past and you notice that your older birds generally handle it pretty well, you could probably turn them out when they're a little bit smaller. If it's your first time turning out young birds with your hens, personally, I would wait till they're a little bit bigger, which I didn't. Let's see. Picture.
Hey, Casey.
Yes, ma'am.
I would just say, like with ours, what I usually do is when I turn them out, I tend to sit down there and watch. Now, sometimes I've had flocks where I've had to go in and rescue the baby birds. They weren't quite big enough, so I put them back in the brooder. And the last 3 times, actually, this flock has been very, very accommodating, and we've had very little ruffling of feathers over new chicks going in. And so I was able, you know, I've put in some. They're all fully feathered, but they're pretty small. But usually, I would recommend if you're going to turn out young birds with older birds, be willing to stay down there and and rescue them if need be.
Right, exactly.
Thank you very much.
All right. Anybody else?
Okay, well, if nobody else has any questions, but I mean, if you do, feel free to contact me or Casey or Sarah at any time and ask a question, or you can get a hold of us at any time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.